Hello and welcome to another edition of the One Drink Book Club. Today we'll be talking with Rick Snider, author of a new book called Presidential Pours. It's a great selection for the One Drink Book Club because it highlights the favorite drinks of every U.S. president going back to George Washington. Rick Snider is a longtime Washington journalist, tour guide, and history buff who has covered D.C. sports and history since 1978. You can see his work on 106.7 The Fan or his regular video blog on his YouTube channel, Rick Snider's Washington. Thanks for joining me, Rick.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It certainly came out of nowhere. I was like, ooh, a drinking show? Okay. I mean, most of the shows I'm on, we need a drink, but it was interesting. So I'm curious how this will go.
I love reading books. I love discussing, when I get excited about a book I like. And then I also like to have a cocktail in the evening. And so why not join the two of them and call it the One Drink Book Club? So I'll go ahead and announce what I'm drinking here is you had, as you said, I mentioned the book covers a drink for every president. And I chose Franklin Delano Roosevelt's, one of his favorite drinks, which is a Bermuda rum swizzle, partially because swizzle is fun to say. And a lot of the other presidents were kind of straight whiskey guys or, there wasn't a lot of mixed drinks, which kind of surprised me.
Yeah, a lot of them are either whiskey or beer, to there. I mean, you get a handful had something unique for them, but they were pretty straight up drinkers. I mean, these colonial forefathers, they were ragers, man. Those guys could it baffled me when I read how much they could drink, or even Martha Washington. I have a few First Lady drinks in there too. Martha Washington made a Roman punch that would have just killed people today.
I couldn't believe how much these guys were drinking. I mean, the early founding fathers were, as you said, they were throwing ragers. Especially George Washington. He was the one the most surprising to me.
Well, he pulled off the upset of the century. So, I guess he was willing to celebrate. But, I mean, a lot of it really was about the water. The water wasn't as safe to drink back then, really, until, late 1800s, before water really became widespread safe, including D.C. And, I mean, Congress had to threaten to leave D.C. to get a better water supply and roads and sewers. Or else they were moving to St. Louis. But so that was, in the colonial times, you had to drink alcohol more. And they even had something called ciderkin for kids, which was kind of a mixture of the two on there. So everybody, they liquored up. And, George won a revolution, so I guess he could celebrate.
Yeah. And what I was really impressed with, like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. So John Adams started every day with a shot of hard cider, and then continued it throughout the day, and then would drink 3 glasses of rum, fortified glasses of Madeira before bed. I mean, that's a serious consumption.
And no wonder they had so much outrage among them. I mean, they were crazy. I mean, George Washington would drink 4 glasses of wine every afternoon, and it was 40% alcohol, So that was just the wine, on it. These guys, I guess they never did drink water, but I mean, they definitely kept lubricated. I mean, of course, George Washington became a whiskey maker. So that's how he made a lot of his money, made him more money than anything else.
That was another fact that I thought was really interesting. For those of you who read the book, it's a fun, quick read. It has lots of information, but I thought it also had a nice synopsis of each president and kind of what their highlighted their highlighted accomplishments are, and kind of a quick overview of their presidency. And the fact about Washington that I found was really surprising was that when he died, you said that his final year, he had sold 11,000 gallons of whiskey that was made at Mount Vernon. And he died being the richest American, the richest person in the country, which I did not know. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he was, and they still make that whiskey at Mount Vernon. They use the original recipe and a replica of the stills. He had 3 stills going most days. You can go to the grist house. It's about a mile from Mount Vernon, because George owned 8,000 acres at the end on there. He just didn't have a good umbrella. That's what ended up taking him out in the end, was being all wet and not changed out of those wet clothes like your mother would tell you. And that was the end of that. But George was a brilliant man, even though he finished his education at age 11. But he was always good at asking questions and finding out things from people. If you've ever been to Mount Vernon, it looks like a stone house. That's actually an optical illusion he learned. He had a greenhouse. He had the second greenhouse, I think, in America that's there. And
Wow.
there's a great book called Washington at the Plow that talks about his agricultural pursuits, including he was one of the first founding fathers who said, forget tobacco. We're not making any money on this. I'm going to grain, and shifted his finances greatly. So George was always learning how to do things. And so whiskey, made him some good money in the end. I mean, the problem he had is he was always off fighting the British or running the government. I mean, he was gone 20 years basically. So he would write letters back to them, but he didn't get to really have a hands-on thing till the very end.
Wow. Wow. Well, in researching this book, what were some of the things that you found surprising? What did you learn? Because I know you're such a history buff, you know a lot about the presidents, but what did you find out that was new?
One thing I didn't know was Teddy Roosevelt was a mint julep guy. As a sports writer, I covered 20 Kentucky Derbies at one point. It's a little bit of a stiff drink, I mean, it's basically a, a lot of booze and a mint stalk in it. I mean, that's about what it is. And so I thought Teddy, I thought, well, it seems kind of like a sissy drink for Teddy on there. The other thing that really surprised me was Jimmy Carter was such a winemaker. He even had a 250-year-old wine press that he used. So he was big into it.
That was really surprising to me too. I would have totally guessed if you were going to tell me, make me guess which presidents were not drinkers. I would have guessed Jimmy Carter because just knowing who he is.
I think he didn't drink as much as he made, but he, inherited a farm, and he had a couple generations on that farm before him, and his grandfather made a lot of wine, did grapes big time. So I guess it was a natural thing to do. And I had my family was a long line of farmers, and during the Great Depression, we had bootleggers in the family in Carolina because, yeah, you had to bootleg to make a living, basically farming back in the old days. So I guess that's what Jimmy's people did too. But yeah, I would have thought he was straight up. He'd have a beer once in a while. And I think a lot of presidents reflected drinking habits of their time. A lot of them were kind of casual drinkers. They'd have one at the ceremonies or something. The colonial guys were ragers because colonial people drank 3 times more alcohol than we do today. So to them, it didn't seem that unusual. And in recent times, 3 of the last 4 presidents have been sober. So, go figure that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the ones that kind of surprised me was Ulysses S. Grant, because I knew he was kind of known for drinking, but you found out that his favorite drink was champagne, which I would have totally pegged him as a whiskey guy.
Yeah, and he was early in his life, he gained a reputation as a drunk because he was a young officer far from home, missed his family, drank way too much. But when he got to be a general and things got serious, you got to save the country. He didn't drink nearly as much, but he drank some because you're in the saddle so much, that you're aching bones, and he didn't weigh that much. So he used it for medicinal purposes of some sort. And by the time he got to the White House, he knew that he really didn't drink very much at all because he knew everybody was watching. And he didn't want to come off as some drunk and undermine what he was doing. So he really didn't drink a lot in his final years. The funniest one I found was Herbert Hoover was president during the during Prohibition, and what he would do is go to the embassies at happy hour and drink there because embassies are foreign soil. So he, a lot of the presidents drank during Prohibition. That wasn't the sober ones weren't around back then.
Well, if you had to have a drink with anybody, any of these presidents, who would you want to sit down and have a beer or cocktail with?
I'd love to drink with George Washington. I mean, I grew up in Accokeek, Maryland, which is across the river from Mount Vernon. So I've been walking Mount Vernon since the 60s on there. And I found him a fascinating man. I would want to have a drink with him to see if he was actually a stuck-up aristocrat or was he a common guy. I don't really know the answer to that, but I think he was probably a little more uppity than we might suspect. So it would probably blow our images of him. And John Adams would be fun to drink with because that dude, when I always laugh. He started drinking at 16 and smoking at like 9, and he lived to his 90s. So where Thomas Jefferson's wife was very against drinking, she had a special thing that she would drink, and she died at 32. I mean, it's so random how all of this worked.
Oh yeah, I thought that did not escape me as well. That the irony that John Adams lived to 90 and Thomas Jefferson's wife died at 32 or 33. Um, really interesting. I think I agree with you on John Adams. I think he would be very fun. I think he had so much anger inside him that it kept him alive for a really long time.
His cousin was Sam Adams, the Sam Adams, who basically started the war with England over he was one of the Sons of Liberty, and they were the ones who threw all $1 million worth of tea into the harbor. And then the British said, we got to go arrest him. And that ended up to the first shots of Lexington and Concord. So really, Sam Adams started the war, and the other people in the Continental Congress were mad. I'm like, why can't you get along with the British? And he's like, you come to Boston and live with them, see what it's like. And, he was a street guy, basically. Well, he became governor of Massachusetts, but, he was a boots on the ground, hardcore guy. And they named the beer companies after him.
Well, he's not the only relative of a president who did a beer company. If you remember, Jimmy Carter's brother did Billy Beer for a while.
Yeah, man, I remember those days, and you could just tell Jimmy wanted to put Billy in a box somewhere and file him away. Because Billy was shameless, man. He didn't care. He was just trying to hawk beer and sell. And I never had any Billy Beer though. I was a teenager, not that mattered, but I never saw it anywhere, if I can remember.
The only reason I knew about it is that my grandfather, in the basement of his house, he had a pool table and a big collection of beer cans. And I always remember Billy Beer. He had a can of Billy Beer up on the wall. So that was my recollection.
My guess is it would taste like Schlitz, maybe something like that.
I think that's right on.
You get a 6-pack for
PBR, maybe.
Yeah, you get a 6-pack for $1.50, something like that.
Or Schaefer, one of my favorite beers. My favorite beer slogan, I think, is Schaefer, which is their official on the can slogan is the beer to have when you're having more than one.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that was made in Baltimore, right?
I think it was. Yeah. I think it was.
Baltimore used to have a lot. Yeah, Baltimore had a lot of breweries at different times. The Natty Bows, all that kind of stuff. And my dad used to drink Pabst Blue Ribbon, which was probably $1 for 6-pack. It would.
Now PBR is kind of like a hipster drink. Like, you can find it at bars and it'll be in the, price like an IPA.
See, that's what I don't get about today's beer markets. They're all, there's stuff like strawberry seltzer beers. Good Lord, what is this stuff? It's like, just pick a fruit or whatever. Just drink your beer already. You're killing me with this kind of crap.
Well, another thing that you cover in the book is great watering holes in Washington that have been around for a long time and presidents have frequented. And I think I've been to every one that you mentioned because, it was Old Ebbitt Grill, the Willard, the Hay Adams.
The Regis.
Yeah, the Regis.
And the Mayflower.
Yeah. So
and they all had connections to presidents, mostly because they were the big prominent ones. The Willard and Mayflower are the oldest hotels in town. And they did, the Mayflower had presidential inaugurations from Silent Cal Coolidge all the way up to Reagan. They were it before the town was full of bigger ones. But the Willard had a lot. I think they said 23 straight presidents drank at the Willard until Trump, who doesn't drink. So they had that. The Hay Adams, which is right on the corner of the White House, I drank at all these places too. That's where you go down in there. It's called Off the Record pub. But a lot of White House people I've seen in there drinking, and they talk about things, and you're like, good Lord, this is a city with supposedly 10,000 or more spies. I hear that's a conservative number from people I know. And yet they're just talking about stuff, It's a cool bar. It's in the basement of the hotel on there. And I like the Willard. It's a nice round one, right?
Round robin, right?
Yeah, and it's they make good drinks there. That's a serious bartenders there, on all that. The Edgar is what it's called at the Mayflower from J. Edgar Hoover, who ate lunch in there for 20 straight years every day. Was not known to be a drinker and made his G-men not drink, at least on duty, which I would think would be right. But he was a very anti-temperance guy.
That's funny. I've had lunch several times at the Edgar, and I didn't know where the name came from. I was unaware that it was from Edgar J. Hoover.
Yeah, they did everything about oh, good 10 years ago. They renovated the place, and that's when they decided to name it for him. And he sits just in today's world. You have a bar when you walk in, and just to the left behind it is where he always sat. And that way, if the media was out front in the lobby, like we often do, he went out the back way, and he could escape from it. But he was like he'd terribly. He would eat a salad and half a grapefruit and stuff like that. I mean, no wonder he's such a sour guy.
Uh, yeah, that's the worst lunch ever. Half a grapefruit and a salad, man. Um, what one of the things I thought was interesting is that found Teddy Roosevelt to be your favorite. You mentioned that he's your favorite president. What makes him your favorite president?
Yeah, I think if we ranked presidents, it's always Washington versus Lincoln, and I could argue either point. I teach U.S. history some, so it could go either way. But I think Teddy's number three. And what I liked about Teddy is he basically said, think big, act big, be big, and he helped really usher the U.S. into world prominence. He was president before the Worst World War, which really did move us up in the world order, but he set us up for that. And Teddy was a very sick kid as a youth, and they decided strong, exercise and such would gain his health, and it did very much. And he went out west and was going to be a cowboy for a while. But I mean, he was the guy that basically didn't care what anybody else thought, and he was going to succeed. And he did great things like the Panama Canal as Teddy Roosevelt. Who knew that? Stuff like that. And Teddy was just walks off and carry a big stick. I mean, he ended up starting his own cavalry unit for the Spanish-American War. That's what really irked me when the Nationals first started in D.C. and they had the president's race. Teddy would lose for like, I don't know, 3 years. And they thought it was funny. And I would write columns then for the Examiner. And I said, it's not funny. You're taking one of the greatest Americans and turning him into a joke so kids think Teddy Roosevelt's an idiot. And he wasn't. He was quite the opposite.
Right. That I just recently read a book called The War Lovers, and it was all about the lead up to the Spanish American War, covered a lot about Teddy Roosevelt and some of his advisors, his friends, and how that happened. It was really fascinating. I mean, it covered his behavior in the war, in the formation of that cavalry unit. And, yeah, it definitely it was a really interesting book and gave me a different perspective on the war.
One really weird part about Teddy, well, two things. One, he hated the name Teddy. He preferred TR. He didn't make any money off that bear. So that wasn't one of his, it's funny we still remember him as Teddy, but like that. And the other thing is, if you see a picture of Abraham Lincoln's funeral in New York City as it goes, a very prominent picture. You look way up to the top and there's a kid staring out a window of the building they're going by. That was Teddy Roosevelt at 6 years old.
Oh, wow. That's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So I had no idea they had passed each other that way, but Teddy was, a New York kid, came from some money. His niece was Eleanor Roosevelt. So Eleanor's father was Teddy's brother, who had died younger, and Franklin was a fifth cousin. So they were all Roosevelts. But Teddy's family, he had a daughter, who also who lived on Embassy Row. I do tours about her place, and she was a first cousin to Eleanor. So it's a small world. The Roosevelts were a great family. All his sons fought in wars, one or two. Teddy Roosevelt's son Teddy, died basically in the Normandy invasion. He was in his 50s. They said, "You're too old for this." They landed at Omaha Beach. They were on the wrong spot. Teddy the Jr. got him to safety, and then suffered a massive heart attack and died.
Oh, wow. I did not know that story.
And so all of
Interesting.
his sons. He had another son shot down over France in World War One, Quentin, and another one committed suicide while in the military in World War II. One of his daughters was a field nurse in World War I, met a surgeon, married him. So they were, screw the Kennedys. These guys were the real deal to me, the Roosevelts.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned in the book, speaking of relatives, that you're distantly related to 5 different presidents. How did you find that out? Are you a big genealogy guy?
Yeah, I am. And also, Ancestry.com used to do this. They don't do it anymore. Years ago, they would say, "You're related to these people." And they would put out a
Oh,
whole list,
interesting.
because I'm a distant cousin to all of them. I'm more closely relying to John Wilkes Booth, would be my third cousin today. So I've got a president who was assassinated. I've got an assassin. I've got I'm a sixth generation Washingtonian. So, I know I'm related to everybody in town.
All right. Well, my last question is more off topic, but it's how the Commander's going to do this year, and should we have any hope as Commander fans?
I was at Commander's Park today because I've covered the team since the '80s, and I tell you what, it was for February. It was busy. Everybody, people moving, new coaches around. It really sensed this real piece of urgency in that building. And I was like, wow, look at all this. I mean, this is new people. They got a lot of ground to cover. You got to look at your old players. Who do you need? Who are you keeping? The combine's coming up. It won't be for lack of trying. And I think the last coaching staff just burned out. And, players sense that. When players sense that you're burned out like that, they ain't going to play for you anymore. And we saw that last year. They gave up last 8 games. I think that you'll see a massive team turnover. This year, I would expect them to get back to 500. The quarterback and the number 2 pick, what they do there could be essential to the whole thing. But I do have a lot more optimism than I've seen in a while. So I keep wanting to retire, and I keep pulling me back another year. So when Dan Snyder said he was retiring, I was like, ooh, okay, I'm sticking around because I've endured this mess for so long. And finally, they're free of the shackles of just that guy. And now now they can be like any other team, and maybe they succeed, maybe they don't. But before, there was no chance.
Yeah. Well, I moved to Washington in 1996, and so I have never really experienced a decent team. There's been a few bright spots here and there, but I'm ready to have some fun a little bit during the football season where I'm not just
Yeah.
watching other teams.
Well, if they ever win a Super Bowl again, I remember the old parades would draw a legitimate million people downtown. And this is in late January when the weather sucks. It's like the inaugurations. Anybody can have a Caps celebration in June, you know, or even the Nats on a nice day. I guess it was late October. But do it in January in this town, you're committed, or you should be committed. But they would have a million people. I mean, one of them was even in the rain and everything, and people came. It is the unifying task in this town has been it. They became great in the '70s when the Senators had left, so they had to market to themselves. They had 20 years of great teams, and then afterwards, nothing. I mean, I've been covering it for so long now. It's like I'm not even phased by losses. Yeah, please. I've seen worse than this most times. It's just a shame. You need a Drake. I mean, when I used to work at the racetrack years and years ago, I was a horse racing writer. I had a beer tap literally within arm's length of my desk because reporters were known as drunks way back in the day. They were. I mean, I started in the '70s, so I remember when you could just pour a beer while you're sitting there typing. I mean, they all did too. They used to have a deal. These 4 racing writers from prominent papers. They had a designated writer. He'd stay sober. He'd write 4 versions of the story, and they used to give them to the teletype writer who'd send them in. So you never had to talk to a boss. And the other 3 would get drunk, and they just rotate every day who was the designated guy.
Cool
Yeah,
writing for
we
sure.
are miscreants. Yeah, we're miscreants, as people believe. And then today, you got to be nice to each other, or else you go down to HR. But I used to see fights in newsrooms and drinking in newsrooms and all these kind of things. And that's what I love about the business. We don't have to say anything. We don't have to bow to anybody. We can do what we want, and then we can write bad stuff about you if you don't like it. So you know, it's a different world in today's media.
Well, you've seen it all. I mean, you've seen a huge shift. it'll be really interesting to see what happens with the news media and reporters over the next 5 to 10 years, because with the layoffs and the way that the media is working right now, it's kind of anybody's guess on where it ends up.
I was laid off 6 times in 8 years.
Jeez.
And at the end, I didn't know what to do exactly. I was still writing for a couple. I write for 106.7 The Fan, well, local radio sports talk, and another one. But I said, I'm going to try this social media show. I'm going to be on YouTube. I call it Rick Snider's Washington. So I can talk about anything in town that I want. And I do some tourism stuff. People like, I do food occasionally. People love the pizza shows where I get a couple of sports writers. We sit there and eat pizza and talk, that kind of thing. Or I mostly talk about the Commanders. And I make far more money off of that stuff than I do getting paid by the radio station. So I think what reporters are going to have to do is become their own brand and their own kind of media outlets in a way, because big media is just killing us. They're owned by conglomerates and they don't want to lose any money. And it used to be considered a public trust, and it's no longer that. And they pay people so badly. I don't know how a young reporter is going to stay in this business like I did. I've done 46 years. I'm the longest sports writer in town. I outlasted all those bastards. So, um, but I don't know how the next guy is going to do it. It's a tough business to be in overall.
And sports itself, I mean, they have essentially eliminated the local sports person on the local TV shows. I mean, they have the anchors, will occasionally talk about big sports, but there's not like the sports section that there was even 10 years ago, where they talk about some high school sports, they talk about different sports. It just doesn't exist anymore.
TV, people don't realize that TV news has been decimated as much as newspapers. Very few people. I mean, the weather's on every 4 minutes. Yeah, it's still cloudy outside. It amazes me how much time they get and traffic. But the days of George Michael and, Glenn Brenner and Warner Wolf and all those guys, I knew them. I mean, they were making serious money and all that now. And now it's nothing, on there.
I've had the same thought about the weather. It's unbelievable in a 20-minute local, newscast, how much time gets dedicated to what happened earlier today that we all witnessed. We were all there. We saw that it rained. We saw that it didn't rain. We saw that it was hot. And they go through it, and it actually gets pretty scientific too. They show the high pressure zones, all this, which is so bizarre. I don't know. Like it is such a strange thing that we dedicate so much time to what we've all experienced.
I just laugh because they get 30 seconds to go, it's 48 degrees outside. I'll be back in 5 minutes to tell you what it'll be like then. And, good Lord, just stick up a graphic. It says 7 days. Is it going to rain? And what's the high temperature? That's all I need to know. They sucker everybody in on these things. They're the one who survives. Who would have thought the meteorologist would be the guy who's the last man standing? But yeah, the media itself is just gotten younger. People like me are disappearing. And so you have no mentors with the younger guys. I try to do that when I can, because I've seen it all. I mean, when the Commanders sold last year, I remember I covered it, the one before. I've done the stadium chase before. I know what this is like. And people are people. The years change, but what people are don't. So I used to do a Cook impression all the time, but nobody knows what he sounds like anymore. So, it's like, by God, I'm not going to do it anymore. I mean, just, he was a real fun guy to cover. He needed a drink. And he did a lot,
Oh
he was,
yeah, and his wife too, if I remember right.
yeah, the number 4, I think it was, Marlena. I was telling somebody today about the time she got drunk in Georgetown and her boyfriend was on the car hood and they're racing down M Street. And and the cops pulled her over. And she got so mad, she took off her shoe and hit the cop in the face. And then he had to arrest her, so he almost deported her from that. Yes. The Cooks were interesting. The Squire and all. It's not, Dan was just mean. Nobody liked him. We've never had anybody sell the team when they were alive. It's been a couple of times before. I didn't know you had to leave the country too, but the new guy, I think he's a pretty decent guy. I think he's straightforward, Josh Harris, and they've made a lot of good hires. That doesn't mean you're going to win, but it won't be for lack of trying.
Well, good. Well, I'm looking forward to watching it. I'm going to thank you for joining the show. Tell people how they can get Presidential Pours. Where do they buy it?
Uh, you can always go to Amazon, but if you go to monumentalthoughts.com, that's on my website. I'll sign it for you. Same price. It's only $15, includes shipping. I mean, it's something simple. I mean, it's not. I didn't spend 5 years of my life writing this book, so I don't want to charge people, a million bucks for it. It's my 10th book. I've written about a lot of things, but it's monumentalthoughts.com. You can go to. I'll do it. We're just a lot of people just trust Amazon. Go there. I get paid too.
Well, great. Well, thanks again for joining me. If you can, remember to subscribe, rate, and review the One Drink Book Club. And join us for the next book on our list. And have a great evening.